So recently there has been a lot of fury, especially on social media amongst Kenyan youth, on some changes to the HELB Act that was shot down by the Departmental Committee on Education in the National Assembly. Those changes had two key concepts in them. One was the reduction of the interest rate from the current 4% to 3%. The other was an increase of the repayment holiday from the current 1 year to a proposed 5 years. That fury might be placed or might be coming from a very deep place, and especially for Kenyan youth who immediately after graduating cannot secure jobs at all, not in the first year, some not even in the first 5 years.
The Departmental Committee on Education recently shot down a bill in Parliament that was suggesting that HELB reduces its interest rate from 4% to 3% and then increases its grace period of repayment from 1 year to 5 years. It was actually a pretty good idea at face value, I would like to agree. And there have been a bit of controversy around whether or not it should have passed. And the ideas that have been proposed by those who feel like the bill should actually have failed are as follows. The idea that, number one, this is a revolving fund and it operates primarily on repayments, and the idea that at least 37%, which is 4.9 billion, is drawn from repayments, and that is the money that is then used to give other students these loans, and as such, our period of repayment should not be increased from 1 year to 5 years. And then there's the idea of course, the interest rates. How much are we losing monetarily if we reduce the interest rate from 4% to 3%? 693 million shillings per year is what we stand to lose. And it's a pretty sober argument when you listen to it. At face value, it sounds like, yes, by all standards, we are not in a position to accommodate some of this proposal.
Members of Parliament in the Departmental Committee of Education raised some key concerns in which I share, concerns in which I agree with. The HELB fund was, the concept about the HELB fund was that it should be a revolving fund, that it should, after some while, be able to continually disburse loan to students coming in from repayments by students who had taken the loan earlier and had now secured jobs. That idea will not come to fruition if we give or increase this repayment holiday from the current 1 year to the proposed 5 years. Every other year, HELB will be requiring the Exchequer to continually disburse more payments to it. Take for instance, 37% of the national of the annual budget of HELB comes from repayments. That is an estimate 4.9 billion.
I'd like to pose the following questions. The idea that the Exchequer is only supposed to support HELB to a certain extent makes me question, have we really emphasized the role of education in this particular country? Think about it this way, 37% of the repayments, or rather 37% of the total amount that HELB raises every year comes from repayment, which means that there are other avenues HELB can use to raise money, that perhaps repayment is not that significant. When you look at the repayments from the Exchequer that are supposed to complement the 37%, you wonder why we cannot have a debate on why the Exchequer cannot increase their provisions towards this particular bill. So ideally, HELB receives 4.9 billion shillings from repayment every single year. So ideally, in 5 years, if the bill was to pass, we'd only have a deficit of 25 billion shillings. And I'm going to explain why I'm saying only. In terms of interest rates, if this bill passes, we'd have had a deficit of 693 million shillings a year. Loosely translates to 3.4 billion shillings in 5 years. So my question then becomes, can you genuinely convince me that an education-loving country and Parliament is going to be unable to raise 30 billion shillings in support of education for 5 years, after which the revolving fund idea shall continue to, take effect, and yet we lose 2 billion shillings to corruption every day? I mean, really, we can raise that money in 15 days, I would like to presume.
4.9 billion if lost by the HELB from those repayments, because we've now given students a further 5 years repayment holiday, will have to be coming from the Exchequer. The Exchequer is hardly funding very essential services. All facets of this economy of this country are facing budget cuts. So if that burden is again given to the Exchequer, it will not come. So what will happen to HELB? They will not be able to continually disburse loans to incoming students. Take the proposed interest cut from the current 4% to 3%. HELB estimates that 693 million will be lost every year because of that 1% interest cut. That again weakens its kitty. The kitty becomes smaller, and when that kitty becomes smaller, HELB cannot continually disburse loans to an ever-increasing student university population in this country.
One of the points that came out in the previous argument, that was brought out in a very lackadaisical way, was the idea of employment. And so I start to wonder, have we been making noise about all the wrong things this whole time? That perhaps we wouldn't have to worry about HELB repayments and start varying either the period before which you should repay or the interest rates, if only we had people who had jobs with which they could pay for their HELB loans. So maybe if we invested actively in the idea of creating jobs, if we invested actively in phasing out older people, especially older retirement age people, especially in public offices, if we invested heavily in ensuring that our education system was tailored towards ensuring that we put out skilled people that can take up jobs in this economy, and not just the CBC fallacy, perhaps if we went out of our way to create enabling environments for businesses that could then employ our people, that we would not be having pedestrian conversations like that of, no, let's make it 5 years, no, let's make it 4 years, as was the proposal in the BBI, that perhaps we would raise a population that was willing and able to pay back their loans. Not just HELB loans, but loans across the board.
Arguments could be made that we should create more jobs to make Kenyan youth get into the job market and start repaying their student loans immediately. But that hasn't been happening. So, whereas we would expect that to be happening, because it hasn't been happening, the idea of the 5 years to me is really crippling the idea that we should give loans to students to continue to further their education. So that theory, I think, is misplaced, to be honest. I think that the revolving fund idea is a long-term one, is the one that makes more sense to more Kenyan youth.
Recently, Parliament rejected a motion, since of course it's in that phase where we just reject everything. Parliament rejected a motion that was a very prudent motion that was proposed by the BKBK, the Buy Kenya Build Kenya policy. Way back in the day, remember the Buy Kenya Build Kenya policy was an idea that the more we invest in our local, manufacturers, the more we build the economy in this country. So the proposal was supposed to be an amendment to the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Amendment. The bill proposed that all foreign tenders source not less than 40% of their supplies from local contractors. And of course, there was the other proposal that was to increase the amount of tenders where Kenyan citizens were given exclusive preference from 500 million shillings to 20 billion shillings. So when you think about some of the contracts that have been put out, when you look at Nairobi Expressway, that it's 356 billion shillings, when you think about what foreign contractors do, which is basically circulate as much of that money in their economy by buying every single thing from their economies, what does that mean if we put an import substitution policy in place? Ideally, we're looking at money circulating within our economy and hence giving us a chance or the luxury to spend this money as we would want. Yet such a pivotal policy failed in Parliament. Let me take you back to the ruling party's electioneering campaign promises way back in 2017. The first promise was, of course, 1.3 million jobs were to be created every year, and the national government was to work in conjunction with the county government to establish at least one industry in every country. 1.3 million jobs since 2017 should very easily translate to at least 6.5 million jobs in 2022. Yet the unemployment situation in this country still remains as dismal as it was, if not even worse. Yet when you are presented with a bill this pivotal in Parliament, it flops.
So equally, just as were these proposals to the HELP Act which were going through Parliament, the Building Bridges Initiative equally had a similar proposal of increasing that repayment holiday from the current 1 year to 4 years. Some members of Parliament were really vouching for the BBI and happened to be part of that Departmental Committee which shot down these proposals. To them, I ask, when were you lying? Why the dishonesty? Why on one side vouch for a document that proposes an increase in that repayment holiday from the current 1 to 4 years, while in another sitting of Parliament argue that that is not economically feasible?
This brings me to the rational conclusion that perhaps the government had zero intentions of ensuring that some of these electioneering campaigns actually were followed through. That it is intentional for the simple reason that an unemployed population basically is an empowered population, but an empowered population would be very unideal for a system that depends on leeching off of the unemployed majority or the greater majority of people that is not just unemployed but uneducated as well and unskilled. So it creates a toxic cycle where you're going to have these parliamentarians constantly play the role of savior every 5 years, and when I think of it, that is a wonderful marketing strategy. Hats off to them.